I just finished a 4-year bachelor's degree at university as an English major, and in this video I'm going to be going over all the books that I had to read for my degree. But out of all of the books that I had to read, there was only one that I'd give 5 stars. So in this video, I won't be going over the poems, short stories, or essays that I had to read for my degree. I'll only be going over the books and the plays. The first novel that I'm going to be discussing is Benito Sereno by Herman Melville, and this one I'd give a 3.5 out of 5 star rating. So this book, I don't want to spoil too much, but it's about slavery and about a slave ship. It's not only about the way that the slaves were treated though, it's about the way that they were viewed as a monolith, not as individuals that could act and speak for themselves. I really thought that there was some good powerful imagery used and memorable moments. I also thought that the twist there was done really well, executed logically with hints sprinkled throughout. So I definitely recommend reading this book, and I'm actually planning to reread it sometime soon. The next work I'm going to be going over is the play King Lear by William Shakespeare. Of course, there had to be a Shakespeare work in this video. So this one was simply just a play about family and about how family is valued. This play I thought was pretty good. I'd give it a 4 out of 5 stars. I thought that the story was really interesting. I liked the way that it addressed family and the different families that ran parallel here with Edmund's family and with King Lear's. I also thought the antagonist here was just a villain that you could understand. Like, you could understand his point and how he was the way that he was. And yeah, there were just moments in here that were pretty memorable, even though it's been a while since I read it. Like lines like how Lear was disclaiming his parental care, and also the scene at the White Cliffs of Dover really stuck in my mind for some reason. So yeah, I would recommend reading this play. The next book that I'm going to be talking about is Cain by Jean Toomer, and this is a book about the African American experiences and contains different short stories and poetry all together in one book. I honestly don't remember much about this book, so I won't give it a rating here, but I do remember that there was some really good imagery and the environment and atmosphere was done well by the author there. The next book is The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy, and this one I'm going to give a 2.5 out of 5, and I don't recommend reading this one. It's a book about class in India and how that greatly affected one's life there, and I don't remember everything about this book, but I do just remember not enjoying it. However, I will say that there was one tragic scene that I remember really well, and just to give credit to the author there on that one, she did a really good job conveying how heavy and emotional that kind of moment was, so that was done pretty good. But overall, yeah, I just remember not really liking this one. The next book is The English Patient, and this is a book that takes place during World War II, surrounding a unique set of characters that all end up in this Italian house during the Second World War. So I also don't remember too much from this book because it was 4 years ago when I read it, but I do remember not really being that fond of this one. I think I just had high expectations going in because it was such a famous book. I will say that the relationship between two characters was a good creative choice because the way that things ended up for them really spoke to the broader social commentary that he was trying to make at the end there. I also remember I liked the way that the mystery was revealed, and I was interested and intrigued by the mystery of this burned patient there. So yeah, I mean, I'd say maybe it's okay, you could check it out, but just don't have super high expectations because that might affect the way that you read it. The next book is Interpreter of Mallory's by Lahiri, and this one I'm going to give a 3 out of 5. I didn't really like this one. It's a book composed of short stories about Indian people and their lives, a lot of which take place in America. I will say, going into it, I didn't have high expectations. I thought it wouldn't be that good, and I was surprised by some of the stories there. There were memorable things like the story with the tourist and the monkeys. That one really sticks in my mind, as well as a story about the sick woman and her life, and I really felt for her in that one. So yeah, I was surprised by this book, but I didn't absolutely love it. So now on to the book that is the lowest rated in this whole video, Between the Acts, Virginia Woolf, 1 star, maybe less. I just did not like this book. It's a story about a play that takes place in someone's backyard, and in this story we have different focalizers here that just show insight into their past and their lives, but for me it was just boring, didn't like the writing style. Do not recommend reading. So the next work is a play, again by William Shakespeare. This is King Henry VI, Part 2. Yeah, just Part 2. I didn't read Part 1. They just gave us Part 2. Anyways, so this is a play that's about some of the time during King Henry's rule and about the beginning of the War of the Roses. And for me, I'm not going to give this one a rating just because it felt a little bit dumb to read the second part without reading the first and without being familiar just about the history during that time period. So I don't think that I could give it an accurate rating. Now on to Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy. And this one I'd give a 3.5, maybe a 4, 3.5, 3.75, but I would recommend that you guys read it. I'd say that this is a book about dreams and about reality, about how you hope things will go, but sometimes just the way that they turn out too. So yeah, I actually had to read this one for 2 different classes. While reading it though, I didn't absolutely love this story, like going into it. Maybe that's just because I had so much hope for the little boy that we saw in the beginning. I just wanted his life to get better, and I just kind of felt maybe sad reading it. But by the end, like with the ending there, which I did not see coming at all, I just had to say, yeah, this is a well-written book. Everything that the author was trying to convey here made sense with that ending in mind, and it really just completed the novel. Yeah, I also thought that the characters and their relationships were done really well in this one, and I liked how it gave more insight into that time period, into people's lives during that time. So now on to The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. This one is a 4.5 star for me, and I would recommend that you guys read it. I would say this is a book just about a poor migrant family's journey to the West in search of a fresh start and a better life. Yeah, I love Steinbeck, so I was happy to read this one. And while reading this one, I could actually see elements of his other books, how they came together here, and he just kind of combined them and just, yeah, made them all into this one novel here. Yeah, it's obvious why it's a classic. I highly recommend it. And I really like how it gave readers an insight into the real dreams that people during that time had and why they felt motivated and pushed to try and achieve these dreams in the west of the United States. Then we have House of Mirth by Edith Wharton, and this is a book about wealth and class and societal expectations and the pressures of marriage and status for women at that time. This is another one that I vaguely remember, so I'm not going to give a rating to, because I'm going to be honest, I'm not going to pretend that I remember this book from 3 years ago absolutely perfectly. Some I will, some I just won't. But yeah, I just don't remember enough to comment on this one. Then we have Cockroach by Roy H. And this is a book about an immigrant and the struggles that he faces, especially mentally. Also about his relationships with other immigrants and other people in his community. And this is another book that I don't remember that well, but I remember maybe not being the most fond of. I did find it kind of unmemorable, so I'm just not going to comment on this one too much. Then we come to The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and this was a 3.5 star for me, and I recommend that you guys read it. This is a classic book about identity and about good and evil. I thought that it was a unique idea that showed the split between good and evil and one's inner thoughts really well. And we talked about how this book addresses ideas of moral duty, good and evil, society's fascination with uncovering the mysteries of the abject, and the desire to preserve beauty. But I think my expectations for this novel were just too high, and I also didn't like the framing of how we learned what happened. So yeah, that's why this one isn't super highly rated for me, but it is just a decent book here and a unique idea. Then we have Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert, and this one I'm going to give a 3 out of 5. A really solid book with good writing. I just think it wasn't to my personal taste. It's not really the kind of book that I would pick up, but it is definitely solid for sure. And yeah, I thought that it was an interesting cautionary tale about the way that you think and you want people to act and the way they actually act. So that was cool. And yeah, in class we just talked about a few things to do with this book, but yeah, how it was a cool portrayal of the new woman in literature. Then we have Dracula by Bram Stoker, and for me this was another 3 out of 5 star. Yeah, it's a classic book, not only about vampires but about empire. And it's a story that's interesting, but I personally just didn't like this style with the letters and the journals. That just was not for me. And I feel like it kind of dragged at some points. I also don't like horror in general, so this one was not to my particular taste. But in class we discussed how this was an important novel, just showing the othering of people and nations and displaying how the empire rewrites the other as an essential component to itself. Now we come to the 5-star book in this video, which is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. 5 out of 5. This was an amazing book. And this is a book about beauty, about aesthetics, about good and evil, about monstrosity, about immorality, about morality. And I really love this book. I thought that the story, the plot, the idea itself was a unique and creative idea. I also thought that all of the ideas that Oscar Wilde wanted to convey were done, executed really well in this book, with the dialogue, with the characters, with just the setting. Everything about it fit together in a way that got his point across. Yeah, nothing felt unnecessary or overdone there. In class, we discussed how this book talks about societal decadence and how a lack of harmony in oneself can prevent one from being an authentic ontological whole, and other stuff. There was lots to discuss about this book. But yeah, I just definitely recommend that you guys read it for yourself and see how you like it. So now we come to Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. 3.5 out of 5 for me, and I recommend that you read this one. This is a book that follows a European man's journey into Africa during the time of colonialism. Yeah, it's a classic book. It was done well. It's an interesting look into the racism and racial ideas at the time. Discuss how a closer reading of the book can show how even at the time this book was forward-looking and anti-imperial, one can still see how Conrad was buying into the racial discourse and racial narratives of the time through the language and symbolism present throughout the book. And yeah, it's an interesting read. I would recommend that you read it with that in mind. Then we have Sanders of the River by Edgar Wallace. For me, this was a 2-star book. And this is a book about the different events that a colonial commissioner in Africa has to deal with and has to manage. And it's an interesting look at the colonial perspective of Africa, but it was just hard to read that perspective because it just has this poor outlook of the Africans there and paints them in violent and just savage manners a lot of the time. So I would say though, it's good to gain knowledge of that perspective and see the way that people really believed and really thought during that time. But yeah, not my favorite book. Then we have Things Fall Apart by Achebe, and for me this was a 4.5-star book. It is a book about the colonial takeover of African communities by these colonial forces. It's a really well done book that is so popular and so classic for a good reason. It shows the exchange between the West and Africa in a way that doesn't push for the demonization of all the European people. Yeah, and then being able to see this, the colonial subject's perspective was really interesting. Being able to see the history before the colonial forces arrive was a really important part of the book here. The author does an amazing job of using that to deconstruct the colonial perspective so prevalent in other popular books. But the ending here is what really made this one amazing for me, because it just serves to drive home the tragedy that comes from the colonial interference into the lives of these people. And yeah, one small detail that I did like was the title of this book, the choice of title. I thought it fit really well. There's so much to say about this book, and I really recommend you guys read it and just, yeah, see what it's like. Then we have Death in the King's Horseman by Wole Soyinka, and for this one I would give it a 3.5-star rating. It is a play about responsibility, cultural responsibility, and then colonial imposition upon cultural expectations and proceedings. It was a really interesting look at cultural class, and also how in general sometimes worse things can happen when an initial thing is prevented. The fact that it was inspired by a true story really makes this play more powerful and contemplative. And in class we actually discussed how a more broader extrapolation from this play was also the internal conflict of needing to meet cultural expectations and how one can act when faced with that reality. Then we have Phantomina, or Love in a Maze by Eliza Haywood, and this one I would give a 3 out of 5. It's a book about desire and about societal norms. It's a good book, but there were some elements that I just personally didn't like. However, it is an interesting exploration of identity and of ignorance. It's really good at transporting you into that time period and letting you know about the expectations for people, especially women, during that time, and the stereotypes of people that existed during that time. We talked about how this book showed that the characters were playing off of pre-existing stereotypical notions and narratives in place in order to achieve their goals. And yeah, we also talked about the theatricality of the text and of the performance in the text here. So now this is the final book that I'm going to be talking about that I had to read for a class that was an English class. And this is The School for Scandal by Richard B. Sheridan. This one I'd give maybe a 3 out of 5. It's a play about appearances and about what really lies beneath. I liked how this play challenged what people seem to be like versus what they really are deep down. And another part that I enjoyed in it was how somebody could still cling to their morals and their values even if they did some other bad things. There were still some things that they valued. They weren't fully bad. I liked seeing that. In class, we talked about how this play was about performance and how many of the characters were playing certain roles, whether subconsciously or consciously there. It was also interesting to get a perspective into the aristocratic life, but I wouldn't recommend this one for everyone. And now here at the end, I'm just going to be discussing a few books that I had to read for elective classes, so non-English classes, but history classes, and then a religions class. So the first book here I'm going to be discussing is We by Yevgeny Zamyatin, and this is a 3.5 star book for me. It's a really underrated and under-discussed dystopian novel that is similar to 1984, Brave New World. So if you're a fan of those books, of Anthem, then you should definitely read this one. I thought the characters and the world here were done really well. I also thought that the author taking ideas about fears and experiences from his own country gave a level of authenticity to this book that some other dystopian books maybe they just lack, you know. Here it seemed really authentic. Another small detail I liked was how in the beginning there was this greater fear of expansion, of this dystopian society expanding out into the universe. So that was a cool detail there. Then we have Beowulf, and this one I'm gonna give a 3. It was a classic tale about heroism and about virtue, but also about words and about poetry. I personally didn't love the older language here. It just was a little bit hard for me at times. Not even hard, I feel like it was just a little bit annoying at times, but it was definitely a decent epic. It talked about God, about destiny, about good and evil, about people and their lives, about respect, and about humility and about pride. Yeah, it discussed so many important things. And a small detail that I liked here was how it showed monsters affecting the lives of real people and how that pushed them to search for a hero and to find a hero and why the hero was actually necessary. In class, we discussed some of the symbolism used, such as with the sword hilt, and how that sword hilt really encompasses the epic poem as a whole, since both are works about violence and concentrated with violence, but when you look more closely, they're truly works of art with immense detail to them. And lastly, we have the Iliad by Homer. This is a 4-star for me. It is an epic about the Trojan War and about the gods and men that were involved. It is definitely a classic, the classic some might say, and it's important to read, especially if you're interested in Greek mythology, mythology in general. It's a good story about war that moves beyond the battlefield into the stars, where it seems like the forces behind war lie, but then into the hearts of men and where the forces behind war really lie, with men's pride, vengeance, wrath, and that exists in characters like Achilles. In class, we discussed how this was a poem of force, and I really recommend that you guys read this one. So those were all the books that I had to read for my English degree. I might have missed a couple because I just forgot about them and didn't have the best notes. I also didn't discuss the myriad of short stories, poems, essays, articles, other media that I had to read for my degree, but those were the main long stories that we covered, and I hope that you guys got some ideas of what you want to read or just learn something new, and I'll see you in the next one.